Hello students, welcome to Chapter 1 of Abnormal Psychology. I'm going to talk to you today about the past and the present, a little bit about psychology and some of the major concepts in terms of what's normal, abnormal, and how we treat it. The book will have much more to talk to you about in terms of the past of psychology, but I'm going to focus more on kind of how we got to where we are today, what's going on today. We're going to talk first about the definition. Abnormal psychology is considered the scientific study of abnormal behavior in an effort to describe, predict, explain, and change abnormal patterns of functioning. Many definitions have been proposed, yet none has won total acceptance. But we do have some common features across definitions, and the 4 Ds are primary among those. Deviance is one, so kind of going on a different path from most people. Distress, dysfunction, having trouble functioning, and then danger. And there are also influences that are found in the definition, including societal norms, what's acceptable for us to do and not do in our society, the culture and its effects on how we live, and then the context of the behavior. So we do know that we have eccentrics in our midst, right? We have people who march to a different drummer. And so psychology attempts to separate psychologically healthy people who have unusual habits from people who have oddness that's a symptom of psychopathology. You could be odd and basically you don't have to have a diagnosis. Weeks in 2015 studied eccentrics and estimated that as many as 1 in 5,000 might be considered classic full-time eccentric people, but they might not have a diagnosis. So, and he found that there were some key characteristics common to the eccentrics in his study, such as strong curiosity, idealism, interests in hobbies that were extreme, a lifelong awareness of being different, high intelligence, and disinterest in others' opinions or company. So those are just some of the few that he discovered. And we know that behavior changes over time and place. And just decades ago, for an example, this kind of elaborate body art would have been considered highly strange. And someone would have been, very on the margins of society to do something like this. But today, as many as 40% of adults in the United States have at least one tattoo, and 25% have multiple. So it's become very different, the way that our culture views body art of this kind. In terms of treatment or therapy, treatment is a procedure that's designed to change abnormal behavior into more normal behavior. And there are definitional challenges that are closely related to defining abnormality, as we just talked about. But that's the essence of what treatment or therapy is. The essential features of all therapy forms are that there's a sufferer or a patient, there's a trained socially accepted healer or therapist, there's a series of contacts that those people have together, and despite their differences, most clinicians would agree that large numbers of people need therapy of one kind or another. So, as I said, there's a lot of history of, mental illness and how it was viewed over millennia and changed over time. But in the early 20th century, we started having dual perspectives of it. And the first part of that perspective was the somatogenic perspective, meaning that abnormal functioning has physical causes. There were 2 factors responsible for the rebirth of this perspective. One was physical factors, and then new biological discoveries. The results were generally disappointing up to a point, but then there was effective medication that was developed, and so the somatogenic perspective really gained ground with that. And then the other major perspective in the early 20th century was the psychogenic perspective, and that looked at abnormal functioning that has psychological causes. There was a rise in popularity based on work with hypnotism at that time, And two people were very prominent in that. Mesmer was one. He looked at people with hysterical disorders and treated them with mesmerism. And then Sigmund Freud developed psychoanalysis, and the hypnosis treatment was part of what he considered to be effective for outpatient therapy for his clients. And through this process, psychoanalytic theory became widely accepted as a good treatment for people with mental disorders. So even though we've had great gains since that time, we still don't live in a period of great enlightenment about mental disorders. And, you might stop and think about, your view of mental disorders. What we know from surveys is that 43% of respondents believe that people bring mental disorders on themselves. Another 31% consider such disorders to be a sign of personal weakness. 35% believe disorders are caused by sinful behavior. And, at HBU, we do focus on some of those factors, like what choices that we make that are sinful do, bring about consequences that we wouldn't want. And then another 33% are afraid of people with such disorders. So there's still, still a good amount of stigma going on with mental health, but it has improved with better treatment options and more recovery rates. This slide really just emphasizes we've got more theories, we've got more treatment types, we've got more research studies and information about mental health. And unsurprisingly, there are more disagreements about abnormal functioning that come along with that. So, but we have come a long way. There has also been a wide change in the way that people with severe disturbances have been cared for over time. Since the 1950s, when new psychotropic medications were developed, including antipsychotics, antidepressants, and anti-anxiety drugs, you will see that there was a huge drop, as this slide reflects, in institutionalization. People were treated more on an outpatient basis after the 50s, and there was more of a community mental health approach as well. People with less severe disturbances, are today treated in outpatient settings that are less expensive. There's treatment for more kinds of problems, and there are programs devoted exclusively to specific problems. So lots and lots of different ways of going about addressing the suffering that people have. Today's leading theories and professions are really listed nicely for you on this slide. There's the psychoanalytic perspective that still is alive and well. We also have the biological perspective, looking at how our physiology affects mental health. The cognitive behavioral perspective looks at our thoughts and our behaviors and how those interact to produce feelings in us. So we know that all of those factors influence one another. The humanistic and existential approaches both are rooted in the idea that there are innate needs that human beings have, and for things like acceptance and unconditional positive regard, and that we all struggle existentially with the realities of life, such as things like life is limited, and so we grapple with those kinds of things. So those kinds of issues would be addressed in those fields. The sociocultural perspective is really looking at our environment and how that influences mental health. And then developmental psychopathology looks at what happens early on in a person's life that would create mental health issues for the future. No single perspective dominates the field, and sometimes people need treatments from multiple perspectives. There are fortunately a variety of professionals available in the mental health field to address different problems. The psychiatrists are the ones that are going to dispense medication, and our psychologists, social workers, and counselors are going to be the ones that provide more talk therapy and other types of therapies aside from the medication approach. And it's a good thing that we have more mental health options now because we do have more triggers now for mental health problems. Technology has provided some new triggers and vehicles for expression of abnormal behavior. We all know that social media has attendant problems with, bullying and those kinds of things, and that people are not always kind to each other online. There's a multitude of digital distractions that we can find ourselves sidelined by. And there's an enormous volume of web-based misinformation that goes on, so people don't necessarily know what's true and what's not true when they look things up. However, there is increased use of telemental health services and mental health apps, and you can get counseling online pretty regularly now. So that is a benefit of the technology that has changed. This is the last slide, and it really does pull into view for you the results of the digital explosion in terms of mental health. The purple line talks about people's online activity and how far it has risen since 2006 up to the 10-year mark of 2016. The face-to-face interactions have declined with the orange line moving downward, almost at the same rate as the other one has moved up. And look at the blue and the green lines. Happiness and quality sleep have both taken a pretty significant dive with the increase in online activity. So we do know that technology has brought about some changes for us that we need to address, and mental health services are needed now as much as or more than ever before. So that concludes my comments on Chapter 1, and I hope that you will take a look at Achieve, and you can learn more about the past of our mental health and mental illness history. So, and I will pick it up in Chapter 2.